Another place we want to configure passwords on a Cisco router is on our lines. Modern iOS routers will contain 3 types of lines, generally speaking, and when we say lines, we're simply referring to connection points going into the router. The CTY line type is the console port. This is where you first connect to the router right out of the box to begin your initial configuration. From there, you can configure secondary connection methods such as Telnet or SSH access, and you can also configure initial addressing. The aux line type is short for the auxiliary port. You can think of this as a backup port, and it's basically a secondary backup console port. Now, these days, they don't get a lot of use, except for maybe in cases where you're locked out of the router console port. You might use the aux port to gain access in that situation. And we have VTY lines, which are virtual terminal connections. These are most commonly thought of as controlling inbound telnet connections. The virtual part of the name refers to the fact that these are software-based lines. That is to say, there is no physical hardware associated with these lines, as we would see with the console port, for example, which has a physical console port connection. All 3 of these types of lines can be configured with password protection. So let's connect to a router and take a look at how we can do that. Now that I'm connected into a router, if I say enable and I give that enable password, I can use the command show line. And from there, we can see the 3 types of lines found on my device. We see the console port, the CTY line, the aux port for the auxiliary port, and we see several VTY lines. In my case, I have 5 VTY lines here. Now, we can do this in a couple of ways. We can configure a global password for a line that will be used by everyone, or we can do user-specific passwords. And we'll actually take a look at both methods here. So first, let's go under global configuration mode, and then we'll go under our console line by saying line console 0. And from here, we can set the password using the command password, and I'll make that password Cisco. I'll just keep it simple in this example, and I'll hit enter. The secondary command that we want to enter is the command login. This is going to make sure that the password checking feature is enabled during login to the console. So we can hit enter, and I'll back out of that. We'll do a show run. I'll pipe to section beginning with line so that we can see that section of the configuration without scrolling through everything. And you can see here under line con 0, which is our console port, we do have a password listed there now. Notice that that is not a plain text password, but that is an encrypted password. And that's because I've previously enabled the service password encryption command on this router so that all of the passwords, rather than being displayed in plain text, those are using Type 7 Cisco encryption for protection. Now let's test that command by exiting. I'm going to log out completely. I'm going to hit enter. And this time, instead of taking me directly in, you can see that it's prompting me for a password. So if I enter that password that I configure, then it allows me access to the console just as I would expect. Now that's the way to do that at a global level, but what if we want to configure that for user-specific passwords? Well, we can actually do that very easily. So let's say enable again and give our enable password. And again, I'm going to say show run pipe to the section beginning with line. And what I'm looking for here is I want to see exactly how many VTY lines that we have. So you can see it says VTY 0 space 4. We'd already looked at the fact that we have 5 VTY lines here, but we can see that these are 0 through 4. That's the range of our VTY lines. So we can actually configure those all at once for user-specific access if we want to do that. So we'll use that momentarily. For now, let's go into global configuration mode. And if we're going to enable that at a per user level, we need to configure some users locally on our router's database. So we need to actually set up some users. So I'll say username, Charles. I'll use the keyword secret because I want to use the stronger password option. And I'll set that to security. That'll be my password. I'll make one more user, username John, secret, and I'll just make that one router. So now we have two different users configured. We're still in global configuration mode, so we can go under all of our VTY lines simultaneously and configure that by saying line VTY 0 space 4. So now we're under VTY line configuration mode, and we're going to affect all of those lines at the same time instead of having to configure those individually. And now we can enable password checking by saying login local. So this command is going to make sure that when someone's trying to connect over the VTY line, it's going to prompt them for authentication, and it's going to check that against the local user database that I've configured. One of the popular ways that we use those VTY lines is through the Telnet protocol. So let's actually test that. We can test that fairly easily by trying to Telnet into this router from another host. So let me jump over to a secondary host that I have. So now that we're over there, I'm going to telnet to 10.1.1.1, which is the interface IP address for router 1. And you can see that it asks me for the username. So I'll try Charles, password, security. And now notice the command line prompt has changed to R1, where that was previously PC. So the Telnet session has successfully connected and verified. If I say log out, it tells me that the connection is closed and I'm back to my normal command line. So it looks like our VTY line authentication method worked just as we would want it to. Now we can perform the exact same thing for the AUX lines. And let me back out a level. And now, again, you'll most likely never use the AUX line, but just for completion's sake, we'll look at those commands. They're very similar. We're under global configuration mode. So we'll say line AUX 0. And we'll say password, set it to let me in. We'll hit enter. And then again, we want to use the login keyword to enable password checking during login, just as we would for the initial console configuration that we did. So that's a look at how we can protect a Cisco device from unauthorized access to the command line interface by enabling password protection for our lines.